You reduce ancient Rome to the blood of gladiators in the Colosseum. But for nearly 800 years, that arena simply didn't exist. So, what did almost 1 million people do all day? Today, we are going to live 24 hours in their skin and prove that your ancestors possessed the freedom and the time that you spend 90,000 hours working to try and buy back. To understand how a Roman citizen lived before the empire decayed into carnage, you first need to forget your toxic relationship with time. We built artificial concrete metropolises, and the original human lifestyle simply disappeared. Today, your day begins violently. Your brain is ripped from a synthetic sleep by the aggressive sound of a digital alarm, just so you aren't late for a system designed to drain your energy until the sun goes down. You live under the oppressive tyranny of the clock, where every hour is a perfectly identical and inflexible block of 60 minutes. The Romans operated purely biologically. They didn't live under the anxiety of exact clock hands. Time wasn't a factory foreman. It was organic and elastic. They divided the day into 12 hours of light and the night into 12 hours of darkness. This means that at the peak of summer, a single hour lasted almost 75 modern minutes, and in winter, light was so scarce that an hour shrank to just 45 minutes. The system of life bowed to nature and the planet, not the other way around. They woke up with the first rays of dawn. They didn't need complex morning routines, ice baths, or self-help books to prove their discipline to society. They woke up simply because the world around them began to roar. Imagine an ordinary man living in the Suburra, the densest, most vibrant, and most dangerous neighborhood in Rome. He woke up on the 3rd floor of an insula, an apartment building made of wood, cheap brick, and mud. With no glass in the windows, only wooden shutters, the sounds and smells invaded the room in the very first hour of the day. The terrifying noise wasn't engines, but tens of thousands of wagon wheels cracking on the basalt streets. It was the screaming of bakers, the hammering of blacksmiths, and the smoke from the furnaces. You waste precious and exhausting time in your morning just picking the right clothes to impress strangers at your workplace. The Roman simply got up from his bed, which was often just straw tied with ropes, and he was already ready. The concept of pajamas didn't exist. They slept in their short tunics. He just had to splash cold water on his face, strap on his leather sandals, throw the heavy and uncomfortable woolen toga over his shoulder, and step out into the street. Breakfast, the jentaculum, was raw survival. You dipped a piece of hard bread into old wine mixed with water, swallowed some bitter olives and a bite of sheep's cheese while standing up, walking down the stairs. The rush existed, yes, but not to go lock yourself in an impersonal office. The first destination of the day revealed how humans operated before we invented modern loneliness. Today, we use the internet to build an often sterile network. We invent social profiles to pretend we have relevance and to feel less disposable to the market. Ancient Rome functioned through the most visceral social network ever invented, the patron and client system. If you were a common citizen, your survival required having a protector. In the first hour of the day, you and hundreds of others would march through the hills of Rome to the gigantic domus, the palatial mansion of your patron, a senator, a general, or a wealthy aristocrat. This ritual was the salutatio, and it was not optional. You would stand in the cold morning marble of the house's inner courtyard. When the powerful man finally appeared, the line would move. You would bow, call him master, look him in the eye, and offer your loyalty. This meant you would vote for him in elections and be the cheering crowd shouting his name in the forum, inflating that magnate's political power. In exchange for this daily submission, he would have a slave hand you the sportula, a small basket containing food for your day, or a few copper coins placed directly into your hands. You spend your days sending submissive emails, selling your value to an invisible boss, swallowing the anxiety of trying to secure your paycheck at the end of the month. The Roman plebeian sold his submission in person, face to face, first thing in the morning, and within an hour he had already secured food safety and the direct legal protection of his master for his family. With his morning sustenance resolved right out of the gate, he didn't feel the deep helplessness that haunts us. With a full stomach, he finally descended into the forum. Trying to walk through the commercial streets of Rome around 9 in the morning was an overwhelming assault on the senses. Shops, known as tabernae, spat merchandise and noise onto the sidewalks. Ancient laundries used pots full of human urine, collected from the streets to clean and whiten togas with natural ammonia. Blacksmiths deafened entire city blocks. And the smell of the empire, the infamous garum, a rotten fish sauce fermented in the sun that they put on all their food, permeated the oxygen. In the middle of this chaos began what they called Colosseum. And this is where the divide between our minds and theirs becomes an abyss. We glorify exhaustion. We applaud overproductivity. We romanticize burnout. And we turn constant busyness into a symbol of moral status. You have been trained to believe that your job is the ultimate purpose of your human identity. But look at the Latin root of the word. Negocium is literally the fusion of enek and odium, which translates to the negation of leisure, the negation of peace, the interruption of life. For the Roman philosophical foundation, the pure, divine, and desirable state of every free human was not ceaseless work. It was otium. Contemplation, art, friendship, free and community time. Manual and waged labor was a necessary curse, an unfortunate interruption that you had to face quickly to buy back your right to exist. You spend your whole life chasing an illusion of greatness, titles, resumes, wealth accumulation, and success based on standards that modern capitalism invented. They didn't need to become successful. They woke up every morning already being enough, and they didn't need to prove their worth by working themselves into a breakdown. Because of this philosophy, a shocking and unthinkable plot twist for us happened. The moment the sundial in the center of the forum marked the 6th hour, exactly our modern noon, the sound of hammers simply stopped. The workshops closed their heavy doors. The baker wiped the flour from his arms. The lawyer shut his mouth. The negotium came to a definitive end. The civilization that forged Western laws and paved indestructible roads did not work, on average, more than 6 hours a day. When the sun reached its zenith, the workday of the masses was over. You spend your life on a hamster wheel, filing away your youth in an office until 6 in the evening. The Roman citizen ate a quick lunch on the stone sidewalks, went into a siesta sleep, and woke up in the early afternoon, already living the free, social, unhindered life that you surrender 5 decades of sweat working for, with the false hope of reaching it in retirement. Without the gladiators of the Colosseum monopolizing human instinct in the long afternoons of the Republic and the early Empire, where did over 1 million citizens take their time and their physical bodies? They went to the most brilliant and forgotten social invention of humanity, the gigantic public baths. We turned bathing into an isolated obligation. You take a 7-minute shower locked in a bathroom before work or before passing out in bed from exhaustion. For the ancient Romans, bathing was not hygiene. The baths were the absolute pillar of civilization, art, and the human experience on Earth. They were colossal complexes funded by the state, where entry cost the smallest copper coin in existence. This forced the greatest social leveling in history. The senator wearing Egyptian silks walked down the same marble steps and soaked in the same hot water as the street sweeper. In the humid nudity of the public bath, the brutal hierarchy of Rome temporarily collapsed. The ritual took hours. Since they despised the use of soap, the body was bathed in thick olive oil. They went to the palaestra, an open courtyard. They lifted stones, threw heavy leather balls, and wrestled in the dirt. The intention was not muscular vanity for a photograph. It was vitality and survival in a hostile world. Sweaty and covered in dirt, they walked through the warm room and entered the steaming hell of the caldarium. There, with heat rising from the floor, built by slaves working in underground furnaces, they sat in the thick steam. A friend would use a curved bronze instrument called a strigil to violently scrape the oil, sweat, dead skin, and dirt from their backs. The final shock was throwing their steaming body into the frigidarium, a perfectly freezing pool that caused an explosion of endorphins and rebooted the central nervous system. You make art, draw, or manage to read a book only if you find some lingering energy in the leftovers of your weekend. They did this every day. The baths contained immense libraries, gardens for reflection, and courtyards for debate. They cultivated philosophy, gossiped about the emperors, and played board games scratched into the floor because they had time. And that is what real humans do when they are not treated as mere resources for production. But what about the cathartic, dangerous human instinct? Pop culture lied to you. Before the Flavian dynasty built the Colosseum and industrialized carnage, gladiator fights were extremely rare and elitist events, occurring only at private funerals. The real madness, the blind and hysterical addiction that dominated the soul of Rome, was located in a deep valley, the Circus Maximus, the chariot races. If the Colosseum at its peak could hold 50,000 people, the Circus Maximus, the largest sports arena humanity has ever built, swallowed between 150,000 to 250,000 citizens, almost 250,000 people vibrating and roaring simultaneously. Society was dominated by the racing factions, the largest entertainment corporations of the ancient world. You idolized the colors, the blues, the greens, the reds, and the whites. Devotion to a color dictated a man's friendships, his political enemies, and caused dark murders in the stone alleys. On the sand track, small wooden chariots tore through the ground at 40 miles per hour, commanded by drivers who became living gods. They tied the thick reins of 4 untamed horses directly around their own waists. The critical point was the incredibly tight turn around the central island of the track. If the chariots touched, the famous shipwreck occurred. The structure exploded into splinters. If the driver wasn't fast enough to pull a knife and cut the leather tied to his waist, he would be dragged and trampled by 16 horses coming right behind him. The crowd went insane. Lives were bet, fortunes were won. The tension overflowed through the stands in a visceral, magnetic way. The Roman felt his heart beat in a way that the passive, lonely scrolling of a modern phone feed, which anesthetizes our exhausted brains, will never be able to imitate. When the last race ended and the sun disappeared over the horizon, the capital of the world did not turn on any lights. It was swallowed by a thick, deadly, and terrifying darkness. We banished the night from our biology. We artificially extend our days through glowing screens and light pollution so we can keep producing, working, and consuming, forcing our body's exhaustion far beyond the limit. In ancient Rome, there were no streetlights, no police patrols. Walking through the winding streets at night without a guard of muscular slaves holding flaming torches was a death sentence by stabbing. The empty streets filled with the metallic thunder of large, heavy cargo wagons that could only circulate at night so as not to jam the forum during the day. It was time for the cena, the dinner. The tiny, privileged elite ate reclining on their left elbows in sumptuous dining rooms, feasting on birds and wild boars covered in the smelly garum sauce, while poets recited verses. Lying down to eat was the ultimate symbol of someone who didn't have to answer to time. But the common free worker, locked in his tiny, flammable apartment in the Suburra, shared a rustic porridge or beans by the light of a single, foul-smelling oil lamp. Your greatest nighttime fear, today, is the chronic anxiety of insomnia, thinking about the emails you didn't answer. The absolute night terror of the ancient Roman worker was that the wind would knock over that small oil flame and set the entire building on fire, turning the block into ashes while they slept. With nothing to do in the pitch black, and consumed by this instinctive dread of fire, the entire city retreated to their beds long before midnight. And it is in this ancient bedroom, in the peaceful vastness of the dark, that we find the definitive proof that we have abandoned our natural biology. The Industrial Revolution and electric light forced the human brain to compress all of its rest into a single, tense, and irreducible block of 8 continuous hours. If the stress of your job makes you wake up at 3 in the morning and you stare at the ceiling in silence, panic takes over. The fear that your body won't function perfectly as a sharpened gear the next morning consumes you. You self-diagnose with severe insomnia. You take melatonin, sedatives, or worse, you destroy your own brain chemistry by staring at the lethal light of your phone in the dark, desperate for dopamine. The Romans did not feel this panic, because they operated, like almost all ancestral humanity, on the wonderful system of biphasic sleep. They lived the night in 2 unbreakable chapters. Since they went to bed very early, the first sleep took them deeply for about 4 hours. And then, organically, and without startling alarms, the entire metropolis awoke from inside their homes in the middle of absolute pitch black. There was a liminal biological interval of 1 to 2 full hours of wakefulness. What did a Roman do in the middle of the empty night? They didn't scroll desperately through social feeds. They embraced that sanctuary of dead time. Illuminated by very faint embers, they talked intimately with their partners in whispers. They made love in total silence. They prayed to the gods of their family hearth. They deciphered and interpreted in the dark the dreams they had just had. Seneca, one of Rome's great philosophers, loved the liminal darkness to organize his thoughts and meditate on the brevity of life without the futile distractions of the day. They observed and processed their own existence without intervention, and when the soul was clean, the tiredness returned naturally. Without the oppressive anguish of an alarm clock imposed by a boss, they slid calmly into the second sleep, which anchored them until the break of the morning sun. We shortened the night to stretch capital productivity, and in the process, we murdered our most genuine time for silent reflection. The lifestyle of the man who walked on the stones of Rome was not a heavenly utopia. The empire was bloody, deadly, built on enslaved shoulders, and brutally unequal. But while we domesticated the atom and raised glass obelisks that touch the clouds, our biology has not evolved at all. Our DNA, our fears of death, and our human need for belonging and community are exactly the same as those who screamed for the colors of the chariots in the past. But we have come to live in a way so mechanized, sterile, and separated from how our species survived for 99% of its history that we might as well be aliens. We traded the vibrant light of the sun for the sickly, lifeless neon of offices. We traded the noise of the public square and the open baths for noise-canceling headphones and virtual interactions with no touch and no scent. We traded the vital, organic, and glorious freedom of having half a day entirely to ourselves for the false and illusory food security of supermarkets, bought at the cost of all our finite time on Earth. You spend your youth building resumes for strangers, trading the days that will never return for the unattainable profit goals of someone else's company. We call total burnout a virtue. We call free time laziness. And we romanticize our own hamster wheel. The ancient Romans who lived in the days before the anesthetic control of the Colosseum didn't read self-help books. At exactly noon, they crossed the line, and the day, the brain, and the body became exclusively theirs. They didn't need to become successful people by the judgment of others. They woke up in the morning already being enough, already being free within the life they possessed. We pride ourselves on having abolished the tyranny of the brutal Caesars of the past. But while you sacrifice the years of your only existence fighting blindly in traffic, in the absurd hope that at 65 the system will give you back your health and the permission to have an entire afternoon to read a book in peace, do not forget, the humble man of dusty ancient Rome did exactly that, every single day of his life. They were already living the life of freedom, rest, and socialization that you are grinding every bone in your body with the promise of one day trying to buy back.